Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be doing a vintage French country suitcase makeover. I'm going to be using this little pink suitcase that I thrifted for just a couple of dollars. I actually got them in a set of 3. Now this is made out of cardboard. My first step was to add some masking tape around the handles. I don't want to paint these, so I'm going to protect them from getting paint on them so that it's not too tricky for me to get that excess paint off later. To prepare my surface, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. I'm going to be applying one coat, letting that dry for about 30 minutes, and then coming in with the second coat. The surface of this suitcase was pretty shiny and I didn't want those polka dots to bleed through, so primer really was necessary for this project. Now I am only going to be using the 2 coats of primer on the outside of the suitcase, as the inside didn't seem to have the same shiny surface coating. Once my primer was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Italian Ivory mineral paint. I'm going to be applying this just to the top lid. So this is going to be a 2-toned project, and I ended up doing 2 coats of this on the suitcase lid and of course around the rim of the suitcase lid. I did end up getting some paint on the little latch there, but that's okay. I'm able to remove that later. For the rest of the outside of the suitcase, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Mulberry mineral paint, and I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this as well. I really found that the coverage was really great with this particular paint, and it was fun to use a color that I don't normally use. So this is just a really lovely rich red. It's got sort of a plum tone to it, and I thought it would pair really nicely with the transfers that I'm going to be using a little bit later on. Once my 2 coats of Mulberry were dry, I took out Redesign's new Creamy Blush Blooms. I did use this in a previous video. This is from their new release. I absolutely love these florals, and I'm going to pair it with this French style stencil that I had in my stash. I believe you can still get this one on Amazon. Here you can see I am cutting apart the Redesign transfer, just working out how I'm going to fit these florals on the front of my suitcase. Once I figured out how I'm going to position them in relation to the stencil design I have going in the center, I then peeled off the backing of the transfer on the right, and I'm going to begin adding this transfer to the surface. Now, my paint actually dried overnight, so it's definitely dry enough for me to add transfers, and the mineral paint has a built-in sealer, so the transfers went on really well. I did have to be careful about how hard I pressed on this cardboard surface so that I didn't get any really obvious grooves. So I hope that this is showing you that you can definitely cut up your transfers and adapt them and piece them together to suit your project. Once I finished adding the transfers, I used Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin to seal over the top of them. So this is going to protect those transfers. I am going to be layering in other products over the top of them, and I want to make sure that these still maintain their beauty. I don't want any cracking or anything like that. Once that was dry, I took out this stencil here. If I can find it on Amazon, I will link it below. And I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Aged Bronze Metallic Paste. So this is a thicker paste medium with a metallic shine. And I'm applying it over the top of my stencil with a palette knife. I'm working in sections here. And I'm just trying my best not to overload my stencil, because that's when you get bleed through. I decided not to add any of the stencil paste to the little details in the corners. I didn't want to obstruct any of the beautiful florals, but by using this particular color and using the paste with that raised stencil element to it, it really is going to make my design stand out. You'll notice I'm very carefully holding my stencil in place, and once I'm finished adding that paste, I gently picked that stencil straight up. I did get a little bit of bleed through under my stencil in a few places, so I'm just going to tidy that up with a wet wipe, but I'm only tidying up the really obvious ones. Once the paste was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1, and I'm going to be applying that over the top of the front section of the suitcase and the sides, so only where I have that lovely Italian ivory. And then after about 30 minutes, I came in with Crackle Step 2 and applied it in the same way and in the same place as Crackle Step 1. I let that dry overnight and then came in with Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze, and I'm going to be working that into the beautiful crackle that we were able to create with that crackle medium. And I left this to dry overnight so that I was sure that it was completely dry. You definitely don't want to go in too soon with this, as you could risk reactivating that crackle medium and then it just sort of becomes a bit of a cloudy mess. So definitely give it quite a few hours to dry before you add in your glaze. So I'm wiping the glaze back. I'm also sort of spreading it with that wet wipe as well, and I'm just really loving the aged effect that this creates. Once that was dry, I focused on the inside of the suitcase and I used Paint Couture's Autumn Sage chalk paint. I'm applying the chalk paint directly to the suitcase surface without any primer. As I said at the beginning, the inside of this case didn't seem to have the same sort of glossy finish to it. It felt a bit more porous, so I was confident that my chalk paint was going to stick well and stay there. So I'm going to paint the entire inside, and it took 2 coats to get the coverage that I wanted. Once that was dry, I used Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin to seal the chalk paint. The chalk paint does not have a built-in sealer, so this step really is necessary for the longevity of your paint. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture or Redesign products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. You'll find that in the description below. When that was dry, I focused on the handle and the latch on my suitcase. I'm just going to go in and remove any of that excess paint, just making sure that it's nice and cleaned up. I then took out my Sealy's Quickset wood glue, and I'm spreading a line of that along the edge of my suitcase and applying this lace that I thrifted. I thought this was a really nice, delicate touch. I didn't want to go in with molds like I usually would because this is just a cardboard piece, and I didn't want to add any extra weight to this suitcase when it wasn't necessary. Next, I wanted to make an inside little pouch for my suitcase. So I'm just ironing some calico fabric that I thrifted here. And now I'm just working out exactly how much I'm going to need to make that little pocket on the inside lid that you often see on a lot of vintage suitcases. I'm going to trim that excess there. This is actually going to be the bit that I fold over, almost like a little bit of a seam. But this is a no-sew project. So if you are like me, you don't like getting out your sewing machine, this is going to show you how you can achieve a pocket without sewing. I'm just using some hot glue along the edge of that fabric there, and I'm going to be using twine, and I'm going to fold over that top bit of fabric so that I have that twine between the 2 layers. Ultimately, what I want to be able to do is create that sort of puckered, pleated sort of effect. So running the twine like this along both sides of my pocket is going to help me then pull the seams tighter. It's going to create that gathered sort of puckered look. So I'm just gently going along and pulling the fabric along the twine, and then I'm going to hot glue together one end of my pocket. And then I'm going to add hot glue to the back part of the pocket that we created along the seam that I've just glued together. And I'm going to glue that to the inside of my suitcase lid. So I'm applying some pressure there, making sure that that's stuck down really well. And then I'm just adjusting the fabric a little bit. I want it gathered in a sort of even way across the front part of the pocket there. And once I get to the other end of that, I am going to be tying just a simple knot. I went with the twine for this because I felt like the elastic might be a little bit too hard for me to actually stick to the inside of the suitcase. I really wanted to keep this really simple, something that anyone could do. So now that I've got it gathered the way that I want, I am going to be tying a knot, and I ended up doing a double knot. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to be going in and using my hot glue along the other side there. We've already glued the other end together. So now we're going to add some glue to the inside of that pocket to bring those front and back pieces together. After trimming off the excess twine, I used some hot glue on the back edge of the pocket there so that we could attach that to the lid of the suitcase, just like we did over on the right hand side. To add a bit more stability, I am going to go along and adjust the pleating there and add some hot glue along the bottom part of the pocket there to attach it to the suitcase lid. And then I'm also going to add some glue to the top section of the pocket up the top. Next, I went in with some more hot glue on the side there, and I'm going to add some ribbon just to tidy that up, or lace rather, to give that a bit of a nicer finished look. And then I'm also going to add some on the left hand side. As I said, this is a no-sew craft, so you could definitely use your sewing machine for a lot of these parts of the craft. Next, I just used some hot glue to glue in a little jewelry cap, I think it is. It was just something that I had in my stash. I'm going to add that on each side, again, just to sort of tidy up that look a little bit there. And I am being careful not to burn myself on the hot glue, as I do have a tendency to do that, so just be careful with this step. Next, I added some more hot glue around the top inner rim of the suitcase lid, and as you can see, I'm just gluing down some more of that lace. Again, I think it just gives it a bit more of a finished look. Next, I wanted to make some items that would really complement the look of this vintage style suitcase. So I took out this cardboard tag that I had in my stash, and I'm going to be using IOD's ephemeral type stamp. I'm adding some black IOD ink to this script style stamp here, and I'm adding that to the tag there. I want this to sort of look like it's some sort of a travel tag that somebody's left on their suitcase. And then I took out another part of this ephemeral type stamp, but I'm just going to use a particular element of that. So remember, you can use bits and pieces of your stamps, and I'm adding that design up the top there. Next, I'm going to use the stamp section of that stamp design, but I am using a rose-colored style ink on that just to bring in some color variation. So I'm just cleaning up any of that excess ink, and then I'm going to position the stamp design that we've inked up with that sort of rose-colored ink, and I'm going to press that down. I then took out this cocoa brown style ink, and I'm adding that to another one of the ephemeral type designs and layering that over the top. I then used that same cocoa brown ink around the edge of the tag just to give it a little bit more of a look of age. I then took out this little metal ring that I had in my stash, and I'm going to be adding that to my tag there with some Gorilla Super Glue Gel. Next, I wanted to create some vintage looking letters. So I'm cutting out this art paper here into a square. It's just a rough square. I haven't done any sort of measuring. Then I'm going to bring together the corners. I did end up doing a little bit of trimming, so it was a little bit more even on the side there. And I am ultimately trying to make this look like a vintage sort of envelope. So I've folded the corners together and brought them together into the center. And then I'm going to use this stamp here from the ephemeral type stamp. And it's just got like two Mr. James, I think it says, and somebody else in this beautiful script writing. I thought that was perfect to go on the front of a vintage style letter. I then used the same postage stamp design that we used on the tag, but this time I'm using IOD's New Grass mixed with IOD's black ink. It was a custom ink color I made, and then I'm using that same cocoa brown ink pad that I got from Amazon on that other little postage style stamp design. Again, I'm going to go around the edges to give that a look of age, and then I did use my brush that I used with the glaze earlier on the suitcase. I'm just using that over the top of the letter, and then I'll use a wet wipe to wipe it back a bit. Again, this is all adding to that vintage look. Next, I wanted to try and create a faux wax seal. So I took out my IOD knob topper stamp. There's a really nice fleur-de-lis style design. And then I got out my hot glue gun, and I'm applying that over the top of my silicone mat. So hot glue does not stick to silicone, so you can definitely use it to do some hot glue crafts on. And then when the glue had started to dry, I pressed my knob topper stamp design side down into the hot glue, just gently pressing that until it sort of went out into a round sort of shape. I let that dry completely and then gently went in and started to peel the hot glue away. Remember, these stamps are made of silicone too. Next, I took out my Paint Couture Red Velvet Mineral Paint and I added that over the top of the wax seal. I want this to look like the candle wax that the design's been pressed into. However, the red felt too bright to me, so I did layer in some of the Mulberry mineral paint that we used earlier, and I found that sort of mixing the two created more of that sort of vintage dark red candle wax look. When that was dry, I used some hot glue on the back of that to glue together the different little sides of the faux envelope that I made. I think my little wax seal experiment turned out really sweet. Let me know what you think of it. Next, I wanted to create a little stack of letters or maybe notes that the lady who owns this suitcase may have written, and I'm just cutting out some art paper that's approximately the same size to create my pile. I'm bringing them together, and then I'm going to pick one of these papers. I'm just going to be stamping on one of them. I'm going to be using the ephemeral type stamp again, and I have inked up one of the designs I used earlier, and I'm just going to press it down, but you'll see I'm being sort of random. I'm using part of the stamp up the top, part of the stamp on the bottom. And then I'm going to bring those pieces of paper together, and I'm going to be using some twine around them to bring them together and then tie a knot. Finally, I had this little picture that I got from a thrifted frame that I saved because it had such a wonderful vintage feel to it, and I thought it would be perfect to go in my suitcase. So I'm just going to be cutting off the rounded edges so that it looks a little bit more like a photo that somebody would have in their suitcase to bring along with them. If you don't have something like this in your stash, you could definitely print something off from online. Next, it was time to add my creations to my vintage style suitcase. So I'm going to add my little vintage style letter. I'm going to pop that in the little pouch up the top there. And then I'm going to add this lovely vintage style photograph. Slip that in the little pocket there, and I did originally have my little letters in the pocket, but I do end up changing it up and adding some lace and a book and things in the base of the suitcase later instead. And then I had some faux flowers that I decided to add. Maybe these were some dried flowers that this lady had collected on her travels. On the outside of the suitcase, I decided to go in and add some hot glue. Unfortunately, this little handle would not stay upright, so I'm just working some hot glue into the gap where the parts of the handle sit so that I could stabilize it and have the handle stay upright. I'll add a little bit of that mulberry paint over the top of this to blend those sections in. To attach my little travel tag, I used some twine that I'm threading through the handle there, and I'm going to tie a double knot to keep that in place, and then I'm going to trim off that excess twine. Next, I then decided to add some vintage lace that I had in my stash. I'm just going to simply tie that in the same section that we have the tag. I'm going to tie that on and then just tie a simple bow. And here's a look at our finished suitcase. I love how this turned out. I definitely think it doesn't look like a cardboard suitcase anymore. I think it has a lovely vintage French country feel. But let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find a full product list and my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks for watching.